Okay, welcome everyone to Sports Innovation Lab's Ask Me Anything series. My name is Shanna McCardle. I am the Director of Events for Sports Innovation Lab. We're thrilled to have Natara Holloway from the NFL here today. I will get into a formal introduction in just a moment, but wanted to run through a couple of things. We started this Ask Me Anything series to provide access to leaders in the industry that were taking action. And our main goal was really to get perspectives from across the industry, from teams, teams to leagues, and from players to operators. And as you can see from our lineup of former guests, we've done just that. If you haven't been able to join us for all of our AMAs, we have them all posted on our website. I'll make sure to share that link after the introduction. Quick reminder, please join our Slack community. It's growing every day. It's a great place to meet new people and share ideas. I will make sure to share this link with you as well. And as I mentioned, we record all of these, so you'll receive a recording immediately following the session, and we will also have it posted on our website. We want to hear from you. This isn't Ask Me Anything, so please share your questions in the question window. Just simply type there. And if you see a question that you really want to hear Josh ask Natara, just hit the arrow but next to the question, and hopefully that will encourage Josh to ask the question sooner rather than later. Now, into a quick introduction, you all know Josh Walker is the president and co-founder of Sports Innovation Lab. Josh came from Forrester, where he worked as VP of Research. He currently stewards our research team and is credited with introducing the world to the concept of the fluid fan. You've probably heard his name recently, as he has been featured in many publications talking about the resurgence of sports. And now on to our guest. We are thrilled to have Natara Holloway, Vice President of Business Operations and Strategy for Football Operations at the National Football League. Natara has worked with the NFL for over 16 years. She currently oversees football technology and innovation, administration, and football pipeline development. Prior to joining football operations, Holloway served as NFL Vice President of Youth and High School Football and was responsible for driving growth and development of the football journey for young athletes aged 6 to 18. Holloway also has served as NFL VP of Brand, Marketing, and Retail Development, as well as VP of Corporate Development, and has served as one of 3 league compliance officers. So that's only a few of the things that Natara has done. She has a really interesting background, so I encourage all of you to look up her bio. But with that, I will pass it over to Josh.
All right. Thank you, Shanna. Natara, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So good to see you. And I'm going to be very honest with our guests right out of the gate. Natara is a client, so full disclosure. We work very closely with the NFL, and I've known Natara now for over a year. We've gotten to know her group. We've gotten to work on some projects together. And one of the things that the Sports Innovation Lab does is we help executives make really important decisions with data. And usually it's at a time when there's some uncertainty, where they don't really know whether to make a certain decision or not. So Natara just got engaged. And I'm going to launch a poll because I think it's important to give her some data on whether or not she should elope. So you guys, now if you go over to the poll, you can vote. And I understand in research that, it's a little bit of a bias, so I kind of wrote this question: should Natara elope? Yes, hell yes, or no. So we're getting those votes now, and we'll cover that maybe later. But Natara, welcome and congratulations. It's very exciting. Glad you could join us. I know that's a crazy time at the NFL, and you've got a lot going on. So let's dive into it. I think for everybody, the NFL is like this black box, right? Like things happen on Sunday, on Monday, and there's games all the time. What happens behind the scenes, usually we don't hear about unless there's a scandal or something like that. So give us a little bit of a sense of like what your role is and what you've been tapped to do. And I'd really just love to dig into your career a little bit before we get into the specifics of what's happening right now. So what do you do?
What don't I do is a better question, but I always when we get on conference calls with a new partner, I always tell them I do whatever Troy tells me to do. I work with the head of football. He's our, if for lack of better terminology, he's our chief football officer. I run 4 different.
Troy Vincent.
Troy Vincent, sorry, yes. I run 4 areas for him in his department, one being his strategic plan for all of his groups. We do their strat plan, their administration, so contracts, negotiations, things of that nature. Our second group is our analytics team, which does analytics from a base case on our business, but for the primary purpose of analyzing the game and how we can get better. So they do a lot of quality analysis, how much competition there is, what's the pace of play, how many calls our officials are making or not making. People think we're not looking at it, but we are, and that sort of thing. I also do our third group is our technology and innovation, which is why we have the pleasure of working with Sports Innovation Lab. And that's looking at how we disrupt the game, but not necessarily in such a way that inhibits the tradition of the game. And so we put a lot of emphasis on that group in the last year. And to talk more with Sports Innovation Lab and other partners around what we can do, because the game is very mature. People love the game, but it's always, we always like to kick the tires and learn things that we have not learned before. So that's our third group. And then one that has been making the news is my fourth group, which is our pipeline group. We do personnel pipeline, and that's looking at how we develop the next level of football professionals. So whether that's your GM and or your head coach and all of the coaching staff, primarily with an emphasis on our diversity efforts. And so we've been skewered in the news over the last year around those efforts, but our team has been working for the last year on some significant changes to our policy as well as to practice. And so we always say Rome wasn't built in a day. So we're brick by brick building some systemic changes within the hiring practices and development practices within the league. So those are the 4 areas that I oversee for football operations. But to give a grand sort of overview of what football ops does, we are serving the football community and making sure that the game has integrity, making sure that the game goes off on time. That's what we're all praying right now for this fall, and just all of the game logistics around officials, anything, I like to say anything within inside of the white lines of the stadium, our overall team takes care of, as well as we partner with the players and to make that happen. So that's kind of what I do and what our overall group does.
Yeah, well, I remember our first meeting in New York because you and I were trading book titles, things that we were reading, and I was sitting there thinking, like, this woman's no joke. Like, here you are in the NFL and you're like pushing on all these like little different areas of the business to really try to make sure that something that's so traditional and grounded in decades and decades of, that fandom that everybody wants to see the game remain the same. You're pushing on the right little areas within the NFL to see that things change. And some of these areas are not small, the diversity piece being one of them. And I think that your perspective wasn't that surprising when I heard about how you made your way through the NFL. You don't have that traditional path in sports. And it's not just the NFL. This is pretty much every area in sports where people are happy to be there. They're excited to have made their way into a sports organization, and they just stick with one path. You've now had multiple different roles within the NFL. Talk a little bit about how you've been able to have that kind of career within that organization.
Sure. So I'm a nerdy little accountant from Houston. I have a background in accounting. I'm a CPA. I always tell people this story. You cut me and I bleed numbers. I started in our audit department and did that for a while. And I was telling this story, I guess, to you yesterday, and I hadn't thought about it in a while, but I had a mentor in our finance organization. She was a Japanese communications major, but she was running our finance department. And one of the questions I was like, you always ask your mentor, how did you get there? And she said, I never go after titles. I never go after specific jobs. I always go after challenges and how do I add value to the company? And I have literally mapped my career around that. And so taking the initiative myself to align with individuals that were in the organization that were on some really cool projects and things that aligned with my interests, but also were things that were priorities to the league, and started working on those types of assignments, and then eventually started getting tapped to do more of that. And so it's highly unusual that you'll find someone, specifically an auditor, because no one ever talks to us, to actually move around the building. But I took it upon myself to really follow that advice, because I thought it was not only good from a professional perspective, but from a personal perspective of always wanting to be challenged in a career where you want longevity. Most people want to be challenged, but they do it among multiple companies. I had the option of doing it in the same company, and it was really around, I love the product, I love the game. I'm from Texas, so football is in my blood. But it's one of those things where if I'm given the opportunity to stretch and expand my skill set, as well as add value to the company, I'll take it any day.
Yeah, and I loved how you described, like, you were always aligning whatever things you were taking on as challenges with the value to the organization. I think that so many people, especially early on in their career, want to be seen as a go-getter, want to be seen as doing everything they can to help the company, but they don't take the time to think about, does this matter to the NFL? Is this important to Roger? Like, how do I make sure that this is something that ties to revenue so that I'm being seen as critical in the next move that I make? And the next move may not be lateral, meaning like it's the next promotion, but it might be over here in this other group. And I think a CPA that is now in charge of, technology and innovation is one of those things that clearly demonstrates that you've moved from one place to another. So it's really, really impressive. And one of the groups we asked to promote this is, women in sports and technology and WISE. And there's different groups that are out there, and a lot of them are trying to find ways to help women think about breaking into sports, but also making their way to the level that you've been able to achieve within the NFL. And I think what you just said is so key to doing that. So now let's take apart your current role, and let's start answering some of these questions that are coming in. So I'll pull us back on track if we get off, but let's just ask and answer some of these questions. So Todd asks, Natara, how is the NFL planning to engage fans remotely and create an authentic experience that is interactive? So Todd is assuming probably a little bit of what everybody else is assuming, that we're not going to be able to go to these games, or a certain percentage of fans won't be able to go to games. Where in your realm of working under Troy does this fit, or is this somebody else's responsibility in terms of thinking about that fan experience?
So one of the things, excellent question. One of the things that we always hone on in specifically football operations, because you can get so tunnel vision. We're for the game. We're wanting to make sure that the game is where it needs to be. But at the end of the day, it has to be good for someone, which is the fan. So although we have groups that specifically focus on the fan, we partner with them in many ways. So we actually have a number of working groups, return to facilities, return to play, return to fandom, that are working right now, that are hyper sensitive to the fact that not only will, in some jurisdictions, will fans not be able to come, but even where they are able to attend games, they may not want to. That's just the reality in which we live in right now. And so we're preparing for both of those scenarios. From a football operations perspective, it's around how do we adapt the game for TV so that you still have that ability to enjoy the game. Because if you probably don't really recognize the fact that a game is in basketball and tennis, and all of us are having these conversations. Yes, people are mostly at home anyway when our activities happen, but it's exciting because you see the people that are in the stands. Mm-hmm. So that reality is having to be balanced right now, because I think we have the fact that people are at home, that they've been at home for years. That's not an issue. It's around that, what kind of environment are we going to be able to create in that stadium that's still exciting for the individuals at home that can kind of feed off of that. And so we're hyper focused on that right now. Like I said, not only if folks can't come, but if they don't choose to come. And so we're doing a number of things that, we haven't actually discussed publicly. And that's literally because right now, today, at this time, in about a minute, it could change. We are still planning for fans to attend the games.
Right. Right. And I think that's been really important that the NFL has kept that door open, as we've seen how the current health crisis is moving from one geography to another, especially within the South and some of the places where there's some of these larger stadiums. You guys have, though, been very clear that you're going to use technology to enhance the game going forward. And when it comes to making technology decisions, what technology decisions does your group make versus another group?
So we do most of our technology that impact the game in conjunction and in alignment with our CTO, who is on the IT side. Michelle McKenna, her and her group under the leadership of John Cave are really that technical guru. We're more so, our technology department's identifying the challenges, monitoring how the technology actually will impact the integrity and the tradition of the game. So nothing that we do from a technology perspective is done in a silo, in a vacuum, without our actual technical team.
Maybe give people a few examples of the things you're working on. Like you and I both know that the chain gang, the sideline, things like that.
Sure.
What else is like sort of in your purview?
Sure. So right now we are really, really trying to get super smart on how we officiate the game. Mm-hmm. And so we've been looking at a lot of technology is been announced in the video and video replay. Mm-hmm. And so we are working. We've actually been delayed. If you ask what has COVID done, because we have to equip the stadiums with that technology, and we just couldn't do that over this off season. So we've delayed our plans for a year. But working in the officiating space is the biggest part of our technology needs, and it's around three areas. One, visualization and making sure that we have the right camera angles to make the right calls. The second is making sure that we're training our officials in the right way. So we're doing a lot of AI work, or a lot of AI RFPs, if you will, looking at how our officials are trained, and then tracking. We do a lot of technology or innovation, just even without technology, around how we track the progress of our officials, because we always call them the 33rd team. They're supposed to be seen but silent. It's like one of those kinds of things that if no one is mad at the officials, it's a good game, a good clean game, but never ever happens.
Good luck with that, yeah.
I know, exactly. That never ever happens. But we want to be able to stand on decisions that our officials are making, and or be able to identify where they haven't made the right call, or we need to tweak something instantaneously. And so we're actually behind, and we've had this conversation before, we're behind a lot of the other leagues and associations who are using some of the technology out there to identify where ball placement is, or where the time should stop on the clock, where if a play is happening and an official is not in the right space, will we have the right camera angles to actually capture that? And so and be able to get that in a speedy time. We're getting that from our broadcast trucks, and so we're depending on a sort of third party, if you will, to provide camera angles for us, which we should not be doing. And so that we are trying to get done ASAP, mm-hmm. As a critical business need from a technology perspective.
Okay. Well, I warned you we'd have to bounce around a little bit as these questions come in. So this has nothing to do with camera angles, but it has something to do with something that I think you've touched quite a bit in your career at the NFL, which is youth sports and activating a local community. So Marty asks, what do you think the right age for young boys and girls are to start playing and developing tackle football skills? There's been a lot of public conversation about this. There's some states that have regulated that you can't start doing tackle till 14 years old. Does the NFL have a stance on that? And how do your programs take into consideration the flag and all the other ways that they can develop skills without actually having the contact?
That was like an easy question. In fact, I spent right before moving over into the football operations group. Our youth football group used to be in our player health and safety department, and I ran that for the league. That was one of those opportunities that I received where someone came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "We need a strategy for youth football." And I was like, "I didn't play. I don't actually have kids that play, but okay." So it was one of those things that they wanted a cold eyes review, and I teamed up with at the time a former player who had played the game for 12 years. I'd been with the league for 12 years on the business side. The two of us got together and created a strategy around exactly that question because we were getting that often. And prior to then, the NFL had really relied upon other individuals and organizations to answer that question for us, and we were really not stepping up to the plate to really give our opinion. And where we came out of this, it is really a parent's decision on when it's appropriate for a child to play football and if it's appropriate for a child to play football. But it is our responsibility to, one, make sure that there are opportunities in various formats of football, as well as that coaches are trained and are aware of, given guidelines for safety measures for when that child and parent make the decision for their child to play. So we work hand in hand with USA Football to put out guidelines and certifications and train our coaches. And then we were out now doing a lot of work around having former players to do the same. We have a way to play platform in which we're direct to consumer, if you will, direct to the players to encourage safer play. And so we took on the responsibility to say, you're responsible parent to say when you want your child and if you want your child to play. We will make sure that they do that in the best way possible. And then, as I mentioned, on the top of that, preparing or allowing them to participate in various forms. So we, over the last few years, have gone deep into having flag as an option, flag as an entry point. We are now actually partnering with NAIA to actually bring flag football to college campuses for girls. So it's one of those parts of our youth sports that actually is attractive to both young men and young women. We 2 years ago launched flag as a sport in the state of Georgia because they were so young, as a high school sport, in the state of Georgia for girls, because there were so many young women who wanted to play. We have gone into states and said, if your tackle football team really wants to learn the fundamentals of skills, use flag as an opportunity. We've had professional players who I think you guys are familiar with the league that it is now folded, unfortunately, because of money from COVID, but they had a professional flag football team that we promoted on NFL Network, and the actual flag professionals beat the former tackle players. Not to say that one is better than the other, but it's just a showcase that flag actually takes a lot of skill, but you don't find the slamming to the ground and things of that nature that have caused concern for parents. And so, to long-winded way of just saying, parents' decision, but we will be right there with you in helping you make the best educated decision, as well as, based on the size and the skill of your child, which type of format, whether it's touch football, whether it's flag football, whether it's we've played around with a couple of other formats of football, but also we've done 7-on-7 football as opposed to 11-man football or 11-woman football. And so there are a number of different formats that we're approaching from a entryway for kids of all skill sizes and genders.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are aware of all those other formats that you're experimenting with. I think they see those things and they go, oh, here's a league who thinks they're going to take advantage of the NFL being soft in this area or with this demographic, and they're going to build a league adjacent to the NFL and take some of the market share. But a lot of times you guys are involved in that. Sometimes you're sponsoring that, sometimes you've launched it. And so I think that there's a really interesting story that the market really doesn't hear it a lot about when it comes to those things. And the flag example that you just mentioned is a perfect one. I don't think a lot of people knew that you were involved in that until it went under, and then it's the negative press and not the experiment that you did. Dave, I'm happy to ask your question, but I don't understand it. So if you want to rewrite it, I don't know what fan-driven audio is, and I'm not sure it's Natara's bag, but I'll ask the question if you write it again and I can figure it out. But I do know Mark's question, and it's good to see you, Mark. Thanks for joining us. Mark's question is really about the career after the NFL, right? And a lot of times the NFLPA and you work together to make sure that there are those opportunities for the players. Can you talk a little bit about that? Obviously, it sort of fits into your whole career development and making sure that there's more coaches and things of that nature. So how's that fit into your world?
Absolutely. So we actually have within our football operations group, we have a player engagement group, which does exactly that. They work on the transition of the player out of the game while he's in the game, when he's out of the game, and way after the game. And so we do a lot of work around that. So we do two things from my own group. We help with the strategy around that. And then we also provide, when it comes to a player wanting to be a scout, or a player wanting to be a GM or a coach, we provide that training and experience for them through some of the programs that my department on the pipeline side actually runs. So we have a lot of engagement with that group, and they do a lot of work that people just don't know about. And unfortunately, in some cases that the players don't actually engage with, but until, they're like, what the world am I supposed to do with myself? But this off season, positive of COVID, has transitioned to a place where we're able to get that information out to players a lot quicker, and then also able to have where we used to take them to a college campus and do training, say entrepreneurship, finance, whatever the case may be. Now you can do that online, and we have, if not 100x our participation levels between legends and our current players. It's incredible the amount of engagement.
Because they have time? Just because they have more
because they have time, and it's easy. I don't have to get on a plane. I don't have to, explain to my spouse why I'm gone for a week doing this training on broadcasting when I'm playing the game, and that person is at home with 5 kids or what have you, this is the only time, I really get to see them because I've been gone all season. So it's one of those, and they also get to participate as well. So a lot of our programs for players are also open to their spouses and families as well. And so awesome. It has really, really opened our eyes to a different way of doing that kind of training.
Yeah. And probably made you aware of a barrier you weren't aware of, which was the actual travel. And that makes sense now, right? Now that you think about it. But the idea is this on demand, or is it like a virtual classroom that they're all there?
They're doing a virtual classroom that they're all there.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So now that Dave has rewritten his question, I now understand it. Thank you, Dave. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but Dave wants a little bit of a specific around this, and maybe you don't have it yet, but the idea that you guys are still planning on having fans is one thing. But if the fans are not there, has the NFL or have you been involved in considering the audio that needs to be generated from not having fans to augment the digital stream to make it sound like there's fans and all that stuff? So I don't know if you're not ready to announce something, but I'm sure that's on the table, right? You've looked at some things like that.
We absolutely have looked at that. And the funny thing is it's more so from, it's the immediate thought, right? It's like, okay, if there's, I'm old enough. I don't know how many of the folks on the line are old enough, but I'm old enough to remember the laugh tracks, right? I was like, now we laugh and I'm like, oh, those sound so corny. Why in the world would anybody have a laugh track? But that's essentially the first thing that comes to your mind in this kind of situation is, we've got to have fan noise. Mm-hmm. Well, this is what I'm saying about the partnership piece of it. That is the immediate thing that comes to broadcast or events, or those folks are like, let's pipe in sound. But then our compliance team and our football operation group says, oh, wait a minute, there's a rule against that. Right. And so it's like, we've got to work to find a happy medium to say, what is enough, what is too high, that sort of thing, because you can actually have a competitive advantage if your noise level is too high. Yeah. And so we have to be very cognizant. So when you ask if we are involved, absolutely, because we have to be cognizant of what types of sounds are are being piped in, how loud that sound is. We actually installed, from a technology perspective, we installed in each one of our stadiums a noise monitor so that we can actually detect when there's noise being piped into, or too much noise being piped into the stadium. So it's one of those things where you didn't think it was a problem, but now it's a problem, and everybody has to put their minds together to fix it. But absolutely, we've thought about that, trying to be thoughtful about it, because again, whether people can get back into the stadiums or not is not the question, is whether they will, if they are able to.
Do you guys measure the acoustic levels from midfield? Like, do you have monitors that sometimes do that? Like, could I go to the NFL, open a database, and see a bunch of files that say Lambeau is louder than, MetLife, which is louder than, like, you guys must know that, right?
Yes, because we fine you if it's too loud.
So Kevin asked a question that's very similar to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with these emerging leagues or the flag stuff. We had the XFL, one of the earlier employees of the XFL on, and Sam was talking about all the different ways that the XFL tried to innovate on the rules. How much do you guys pay attention to how effective those things are? And like, how do you decide, is there a group that says, hey, what they're doing is pretty cool, let's do that? Or is it just like, that was kind of, unique, and then you kind of like, maybe we'll consider that later? Is there an active process to watch something else and go, we should do that?
In any business, if you're not watching what and their true competitors are doing, then you're in trouble. Absolutely, to answer your question. In fact, one of the folks that is on my team monitors that, and that's all he does for other leagues that have developed, whether it's football or basketball. So we watch the G League just as much as we would watch the XFL, because we want to know what developmental leagues, how they feed into the professional leagues. And so we watch all of it. We actually did a lot of the analytics for, it was before my time, but for one of the, sorry, I got distracted because the poll just popped up. It was like, should Natara elope? I was like, what?
Well, so maybe we should just cover that now and be done with it. 70% said hell yes.
Okay.
So now you won't get distracted.
No, I won't get distracted. Sorry about that. But I was saying, wait.
Sorry, I won't touch anything. I won't touch anything.
We actually, we did the analytics for one of the leagues and mapped, trying to find out, what is the level of play compared to ours? How many plays do they have compared to our game? How many snaps do they have? How many turnovers? We actually provided officials to and forgive me, good gosh, I'm just blanking. Not the XFL, but the one right before that. There's a lot of letters that went out last year for different leagues.
There were. I think a lot of people continue. But here's the thing about that, and I'll let you catch your breath, because now you're thinking about eloping. The thing
started to sweat. You notice I started to sweat.
The thing that's really interesting is I think all these leagues get started. They attract investment because of one very important truth, which is that the NFL has been successful. It's been successful commercially. It's been successful on the media rights side of business, and it's been successful keeping fans engaged. You, in particular, have a really, really difficult challenge, which is something we talk to all the sports properties about, which is managing that traditional, balance, the ability to compare this year's Green Bay Packers with that year's Green Bay Packers, or this quarterback with that quarterback, and still evolving the format or involving the game. So I think at the highest level, what this question and what I think most of these questions are about is, what's your key priority for advancing the game? Like, you can't change the entire format, but you run some of the parts of the NFL that are, really responsible for thinking about this. Like, what do you think the one or two or three things that like really dominates every discussion that you can publicly talk about in these meetings where you're like, guys, we really need to address X?
Yeah. It's ball tracking. It's literally that's the one that we're all trying to solve for, because is it 1 yard? Did I get that 1 yard? That means a lot to wins, losses, and the competitiveness of the game. And so from a technical game perspective, it means a lot, but also from a fan perspective, you should, if you ever have been to a game, you'll know when they're about to place that ball, people stand up and they're like, you can tell from the 300 section that, where that ball is supposed to be. And
it always feels so arbitrary. It really
Yeah.
does always feel so arbitrary. It's just like, yeah.
So that's one of the things I think is on everyone's mind, but it is so hard to solve for.
And what have you done? And what have you done in the past? You've put sensors in the ball. You've certainly done
absolutely
lasers on the sidelines. Like what are the things that you feel like were closest to proving some efficacy?
I think it's going to be the chip in the ball. We have done that a lot. I think that the issue, and we're working on that actually right now, but the issue with it is it the tip of the ball? Is it the middle of the ball? That sort of thing. And so there's a lot of nuance that goes into, it's just not where the ball fell that you have to be cognizant of, specifically, like even when you're crossing the plane for a touchdown, what part of the ball crossed the plane. So it's one of those things that it is extremely nuanced and challenging to solve for. And with most things that the NFL does, not all, we're never going to have 100% agreement to anything. And so, we're trying to be very smart and thoughtful about it. Because it's one of those things that this is one of those technologies that I don't think that you can backtrack from. You're not going to be able to. We do this often, and that's one of the things our analytics group does, where we monitor a particular type of play that could lead to a particular type of penalty, so that we can make rule changes for our or suggest or recommend rule changes for our competition committee the following year. They'll say, okay, we're going to put this rule change in for a year and see how it goes, and we'll monitor that. It doesn't work, we take it back out. When you talk about ball tracking, that's not something that you're going to be like, oh, let's try putting this chip in the ball this year, and then next year, if it doesn't work, we're going to take it out. That's not a thing. So we've got to be extremely thoughtful in how we actually even introduce that. And the difficulty, and we've had this conversation before, the biggest difficulty for us is we don't have a lot of testing ground. Mm-hmm. So that's why we do get excited when there are, competitors and things of that nature who can try different things, because we don't have a G League. And when we talk about where we're going to test things, we often have used Pro Bowl, but although it's an exciting game, for the most part, it's not a competitive game. And so that's one of the things where we don't get the real live action. So we've now started working with properties like East West Shrine Bowl to test a lot of technology for the game. But there are also different sized players that are in that game. So it's very difficult for us to actually have real live game practice and play, specifically as we've called for, as everyone knows, even in preseason, they've called for, less preseason games. We'll get that now because of COVID, but that's one of the things we've toyed back and forth with. That's the closest we've gotten to having a G League is the preseason game. But if everybody wants to get rid of it, then where are you supposed to test these things? Mm-hmm. So that's, a more of a complaint than anything.
It makes perfect sense. I mean, again, with all the material science that has to go into manufacturing the balls, testing the technology, making sure the chip can sustain a 350-pound man falling on top of it. Small things like that.
Wanting to fall on top of it.
So that brings, the G League brings up a question David asked a little bit earlier, which is, has COVID almost created a normalization across, the professional ranks in the leagues, where you guys are now looking to each other less as competitors, and you really never were with the NBA, Major League Baseball, but there was always like a little bit of a pride thing. Do you interface with the other people that are responsible for chief innovation or innovation directors, or do you guys share secrets? Do you share best practices?
We don't, from the standpoint of on the innovation side. I will say I wish we did a lot more of that, as in conversations. We do on a number of areas. Diversity is one. I talk to the NBA almost every other week now on that space, or our player engagement. They actually have a formal summit, if you will, with the NBA and specifically. So there's HR. We do that in a number of spaces. Innovation has not been one where we have. And again, that's because, I should say one of the reasons, because on our side, at least from the football ops perspective, it's a lot different than what you would see on the NBA side from an innovation perspective. They can test. They can test a lot of things. Baseball can test a lot of things where we'd probably, for lack of better words, we'd slow the conversation down for them. They are light years ahead of us in being able to to be able to adopt things where we cannot. And so now where we're trying to pivot our position is we want to be smart about technology. We want to know what I used to say when I was in our retail group, what's coming down the runway and how do we take it down to a Macy's, if you will. How do you do that takedown off the runway? So we want to do more of that partnership. So what we've started to do in the last year is like working with shameless plug for Sports Innovation Lab is looking at what other leagues and associations are doing so we can get smarter about it and even and help to contribute to those conversations, but want to do more of those where we have not done that in the past.
And thank you for that shameless plug. Luis asks, and I think this may fit into your group, but are you guys using artificial intelligence to understand crowd dynamics, crowd flow, crowd intelligence when it comes to bringing fans into the venues this fall? And where does that sit within the NFL's purview versus the teams who own and operate those stadiums?
Great question, and it's a unified effort, if you will. So we actually do. People forget we actually do run games, and that's whether it's our Pro Bowl and our Super Bowl. Although we are not the actual entity around kickoff, we run a lot of the aspects of kickoff because it's our first big broadcast game. Hall of Fame, we work in partnership with the Hall of Fame, and then all of our international games. Our actual events ops groups and our ops football group actually run those games. And so we do a lot of fan studies and fan engagement around those. And then outside of that, on a normal regular season basis, our fan development group does that work around. We actually have someone pre-COVID, we had someone at each one of our stadiums each week looking at fan engagement. Our clubs are actually ranked on fan engagement, and the fans actually provide feedback for us on, ingress, egress. When I was in corporate development, that was a big thing that we used to work on, was ingress, egress, because that was a huge issue for barrier to entry for people wanting to attend games, long lines at the stadium. I will say for the most part, the most value comes to the club when it comes to that, because it's primarily revenue generation. But we actually, in our club business development group, have someone who actually pulls best practices from around the league as well as other leagues around exactly that. And we work with them and get a notice on what's new, what's happening now on a weekly basis.
Got it. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the hour, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about all the social unrest in our country right now, which is not different than it's been over the past several decades, but it's reached a boiling point, and the NFL is taking a number of proactive steps. So tell me a little bit about how you play a role in those conversations within the NFL, and how some of those decisions are made about what role you guys take publicly and what you need to be doing behind the scenes.
So I'll answer for the first part, what I do. The social unrest, different than the social justice. We have an entire group that's dedicated to social justice, and a committee that of volunteers who have been integral in trying to formulate a lot of the things that we'll do from a social justice perspective. The social unrest around just pure the racism and things of that nature of what has happened in the past couple of weeks. Or it has boiled up, I should say, in the last couple of weeks. I serve as one of the executive advisors to a couple of our affinity groups, and specifically to our Black Engagement Network, and so have been on a ton of calls around how to engage, how to handle both internally and externally our position as a league, as well as more so employee focused on what we can do as employees and how we can interact as an engagement network. So extremely proud of the group of leaders that run our Black Engagement Network, who have formulated a network across all of our partners, including not only the other leagues, but also like our partners being broadcast partners and social media partners, to to actually come up with ideas and brainstorm about how we can be impactful. Not always, and what I always preach is not waiting for leadership to send out a press release, but how do we actually have impact? So that's a number of the things we have done, a number of things that will never hit the headlines around what we can do in our communities, with our clubs, with our HBCUs, just really trying to make an impact from an employee perspective. To the second part of the question, who decides what's said publicly? That really is Commissioner and his executive team. The one thing I always remind people of, and we've had a varied response in this whole situation, but I always remind people that we are the league office. We have 32 clubs. We are, for lack of better words, they are our bosses. The clubs are our bosses. So it is hard for the league to make a statement that represents all 32, because all 32 are different. They're literally 32 different entities. In this particular one, we certainly have had varied responses, and internally, the initial one, we just honestly a lot of people didn't agree with. And so had candid conversations with our leadership team, had candid conversations and quite emotional conversations with players. And I think it has turned the ship a lot. I've been there for 16 and a half years, and I have not seen as much movement, passion, and change as I've seen in the last few weeks. And I am a skeptic. So I appreciate, sometimes you got to get things wrong to get things right. And I appreciate the fact that we have a leadership team that listens to that.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that we've seen certainly happen is that not only has the current health crisis accelerated and brought a lot of this to the forefront, but to your point, there's a lot more proactive voice being lent to these topics. And it's amazing to see how much work you guys do on the behind the scenes side of things. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate that it's not the league and the teams, it's the teams and the league. They really have to answer to the ownership groups, and those are the people that make up the NFL. So appreciate you spending time with us today. I always like to give our guests the last word. So is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up?
I would just say, one, I want to thank you all for allowing me to participate today. This is fun, and it's in a very different time frame. I am intimately involved with what we're going to do from a technology and innovation perspective. I am so excited and passionate about being able to help to balance that technology versus the innovation. Versus the tradition side. I spearheaded a number of innovation efforts in the NFL, and I love that process of just really being able to, if you can't implement it, at least be able to test and pilot and things of that nature. So anyone who's listening who thinks they have solutions and things of that nature, love to have it. Won't promise implementing anything, but I just love to have the conversation of how can we get better. We talk about that on our team all the time. How can we get better? How can we get better? How can we get faster? How can we do this in a different way that would make the game better? And so I, like I said, appreciate the platform to be able to talk about it, and hope that this leads to great things in the game of football.
Well, I loved having you, and I loved when we first met. We shared book titles and things of that nature. So I'll leave you with one book recommendation, Loon Shots. If you haven't read it, pick it up, and we can discuss it next time we're together. I think it'll be right up your nerd alley. And listen, on a very personal note, good luck today, and we really appreciate you making time for us.
Appreciate you guys having me.
All right. Be well.
All right. Bye.
See ya.